We're continuing our videos with a little bit deeper dive into each of the core features within SureCatch. In this video, we're going to cover observers. So essentially, what is an observer? Well, if you're familiar with website design, you might be more familiar with the term listener. Essentially, what an observer is in SureCatch is it's a trigger with an action. So we're watching for a particular set of conditions, and considering that the trigger. And then once those are met, we're performing the action. We define both sides of that. So observers are relatively flexible. We're able to do quite a bit with them. Well, then what are observers used for? Well, actions. Pretty much any action that happens within SureCatch is caused by an observer. We use observers to fire off conversations. We use observers to update profile properties. We use observers to redirect users. We also use observers to fire off different APIs. Essentially, if something is happening within SureCatch, it was probably set in motion by an observer. I kind of wanted to start off by looking at the different views that we have on observers. So if you're looking now, this is the list view. You can see all the observers that we have. I'm within my Staymates instance of SureCatch. And you can see I have 136 observers. If we can search these observers through this search here, let's go for test accounts. So that's that observer. We can also filter the observers. Let's do a creation date filter. See what I've made in the last week. So these would be all the observers that were created in the last week. Clear those off. You can also sort these by the modified or last modified, by the created date, by the type, and we'll be talking about the type of the observers here pretty soon, by their name, whether it's enabled or not. And then you can also, from this list, enable or disable observers as well. If you click into any of these, you will see the observer details. I kind of want to show you one of them that we have currently set up. This is running on the Staymates website, and what it's doing is it is tracking or capturing any values that somebody places into the search fields. So if I go through the setup of it, we've got a name. Pretty obvious what a name is. We've got a description, and I always do like to reiterate a description. It doesn't seem that important when you're creating it, right? Because you know what this observer is for, but oftentimes 6 months down the line, you'll forget what you're doing, or somebody else will come in and look at it. So the description is pretty vital. We've got segment constraints where we can have it run off of any particular segment or only for particular segments. In this case, we want it to run for everybody, anybody that does the search, so we have no second constraints. We have URL constraints. So, oops, pardon me. This is going to fire on any page that starts with staymates.com. So that could be any sub page underneath that as well. The reason why I do have this is because the Staymates instance is running on a couple different domains. So we want to only capture things from the staymates.com. Attachment, we'll get into attachment a little bit later, but essentially an attachment is or attachment delay is used to delay the firing of the observer. If you have elements on your page that aren't there when the page initially loads, if the observer loads at that time, it would not have access to elements that loaded later. So sometimes we'll want to delay the observer firing until after those elements load. So that's what that's for. The trigger, basically, this is what we're watching for. And then the action, what we're going to do. So in this case, we're watching for a change. Let's take this out. And you can see it says selector. So what we want is the CSS selector. So anytime that changes, that value changes, we're going to update profile property. Which profile property? Staymate search terms. And we're going to set it. So there is a difference between set and update. Sometimes you'll only have the update as an option. If the profile property is a single valued profile property and can only keep one value, it'll always just be update. If it's a list, you have an option between the two of them. Set will continue to add to that list. Update will replace the values with the current value. And where are we getting the value that we're going to put in there? It's from the visitor data, because it's from their website activity, what they're doing in their current browser or pages they viewed, whatever is happening on their visitor data. And we're pulling the value selector from the page. And that CSS selector is the same as what's up here. So we're pulling the value that we entered. Let's see it in action. If I go to search, and then I do let's do it in here. I can do an inspect. Pull this over, and you can see there it is, site search 2, the ID, and it is an input. So if I do a search for what I had, it was input with the # site search 2, which is ID. So it's pointing directly at that field. So anytime this changes, it's going to take the value that I enter in there, and then it's going to update it into my StayMate search. Let's do what am I interested in today? Let's do drones. Ooh, let's see if I did that right. Yeah, okay. So if I go to my profile and I look up, let's give it a refresh. Let's just do StayMate. Type search terms, and there it is, StayMate search terms. And you can see that it added it to the existing list. And that's how we're capturing values that they type into the search terms. So that's a good example of a relatively simple observer. The reason I call it simple is because it's got one rule, right? And we're not getting too crazy with the segment constraints. We don't have anything for the URL is pretty relatively simple. No attachment delay. It's super simple, not much to it. Let's take a look at the observer, a different one, a little bit more. I wouldn't say this is more complex, but it's longer. We've got more rules to it. This is what I call the global observer, and I typically open one of these for each of our instance, and it's where I put any type of rule that doesn't need to be constrained by anything. It happens for all profiles. It happens on all pages. It's just kind of a catch-all wherever I need to put something that needs to happen on page load or something like that each time. What you can see here is it's got 20, 21 rules listed. In each of these rules is going to fire except for any of them that I have currently disabled. So in this page, you can enable and disable the rules as you go, which is kind of handy. You'll note some of these are pretty identical or pretty close. Typically, when we're creating a new rule, we'll have multiple rules that are pretty similar that we need to create. So within here, we have the ability to just duplicate the existing rule, then we can edit it based off of whatever difference we need. So the options in here are duplicate and edit, and then also the option to enable and disable. We can also kind of rearrange these rules a little bit if we need to. It doesn't matter what order they're in as far as how they'll fire. However, it is nice to have your rules just together for a little bit more clarity. So that's what kind of a longer observer looks like. I want to kind of walk through all the elements of the observer. So if we're going to go to create a brand new observer, the way we would do that is navigate to observers and then click this new observer button here. We're taken to this page where we select what type of observer we want to choose. So basically we have 5 different types of observers. Like I said, there's 2 elements to an observer. There's the trigger, and then there's the action. That's what we're watching for, and then what we're going to do once those conditions are met. Essentially, the behavior observers are going to have all actions, or pardon me, all triggers based off of the website activity, things that they do on the page, things they click, the URL they're on, anything quite like that is going to be within a behavior observer. And then the actions that we have are going to be identical between all the types of observers. So I kind of want to quickly walk through what each type is. So behavior observer clicks, hovers, and what, well, let's just look at content present on the page, scrolling, anything like that. Anything that they're doing on their visit is a behavior observer. By far, the majority of the observers I create are going to be observer or behavior observers. The other options are IP range observers. So this gets a little bit granular as far as the IP goes, but it's only IP. We can only set this to mathematical comparisons to an IP. If we want to create like an IP range for a company, if we know their IP range for their internal, we could target a company based off of an IP range, things like. The other observers that we have would be a geolocation observer. And here we have things like that. We do have IP as well, but there's not as many comparisons. We have latitude, longitude, state, city, anything that we're deriving off of their geolocation based off of their IP is in here as far as triggers go. The other options that we have are exit intent observer. This is a little bit more of a niche observer as far as what happens is we're monitoring for when the visitor moves their mouse up to the top of the page, because that indicates that they're looking to leave the page, right? Because they'd be coming up to their navigation buttons, their back buttons, their home buttons, the URL, or to their favorites list. So we want to do something to be able to capture them right before they leave, possibly. We don't use these very often, but they are nice in certain instances. The other one is a URL parameter observer. So this is capturing any parameters on your URL, and we can set it to if a particular parameter exists, if a particular parameter has a particular value, any number of things that we can do with URL parameters there to treat them as a trigger. So I want to go through a little bit more granularly with some of these observers or some of these actions and triggers. So I set up a segment today, or pardon me, an observer today to walk through in this demo to kind of go through some of the different triggers and how we actually create them syntax-wise. So this is a new observer. It's demo setup. It's a behavior observer. I have it only operating on the segment of test accounts, which my profile is part of. So I will be able to, or these observers will affect me. However, they won't affect regular visitors that come to the page. I only want it to appear or to work on pages that start with staymates.com. Again, I'm focusing on that rather than some of the other pages. There is no attachment delay here. We'll come back to that possibly and talk a little bit more in depth with attachment delay, but no need for one in this. So let's walk through these rule by rule. Oops, save that. I currently have all of these rules disabled because I want to go through them one at a time and see what each one does. So the first one that we have is this. Let's take a look at it, extend it, and let's enable it. Let's save this before we forget. So this is content. If I look through the list of it, this is saying, is there particular content on the page that we're currently browsing? So the way that we point to that is a CSS selector. So in this case, the CSS selector I have is h3.wp block heading. So what that is if I go to the contact page, let's go here and go contact page, do an inspection, and we're searching for that H3WP block heading. There are no results on it, so nothing is happening. I guess that makes sense. If I go back to it, if it did have that content and that content, whoops. Yes, when I changed that around, it cleared out that field. There we go. So if that content is there and it contains text of benefits, we're going to redirect the user to NBA.com. Since this first page that we went to, it did not have that content. We actually, let's see what else we have. We go to careers. Yep. So if you notice, I got redirected to NBA.com. Why is that? Let's take a look real quick. Let's turn this off so it doesn't keep redirecting me. Let's come back to that page. Go to the careers page. Select it. And we do a search. In this case, you can see we have 4 matches. And if I look through the first one is current opportunities. And really what these are pointing to are these on the page. Current opportunities, benefits, have a question, and see more. Those are the 4. So if I go through those, the first one is current opportunities. The next one is that benefits. And the next one is have a question. And the final one is see more. So, just out of the way. That benefits because this is why we got redirected. So if I look at this again, you've got the content. Was it present and did it contain benefits? Yep, that trigger was met. So what it did is it redirected me statically to NBA.com. Okay, so well, we already disabled that. Let's enable the next question, next rule. And let's close this up so easy to read. Save that. And what do we have? We have if this is present, then we're going to update the notes. What this is a CSS selector that's pointing to a submit button. So if that's present, we're going to update a profile property. Which profile property? Notes. And how are we going to do it? We're going to update it, which means we're going to replace it. Actually, let's set that. Let's set that instead of replace. Again, what set means is we're adding it to the list rather than replacing lists. And where are we getting the information? Visitor data, the text selector. So this is pulling text from the website. Well, where are we getting it? It's this CSS selector. So let's first go to a page that does not have this. Okay. First, let's go to my profile. Let's pull up notes. I have nothing under notes. That's okay. That's good actually. So going back here to a page, let's go to save before I navigate away. Boom. Save that. If I go to a page that does not have that submit button, back here, to search, nothing had changed with notes. Okay, nothing had changed with notes. However, if I do go a page with that submit button, let's see, contact us, it's got a submit button. That is what we're looking at. So back to that rule. That is present. We're going to update the profile property notes, but with what? With whatever text we find in this CSS selector. So let's take a look at what that is. It might not even be present. It is. It's going to be this. Oops. That is not what I want to do. I want to inspect. Bring this over. Do a search. And that is what I had in there for the value that we're pulling. Where's it at? Stat right there. So it is that send of a message is the text within the selector, right? That H3, the text is send us a message. If I go to my profile now, I refresh this, that got put into my notes. Why? Because it was present, it is present, and it pulled the value from that from the web page. Let's turn that one off. And let's turn on the next one. So this one, it's the exact opposite. It is not present. Is that label not present? If it's not, we're going to start a conversation. And so a conversation, we'll get into conversations in a separate video, but these all kind of overlap in some form. Conversation is a pop-up, it's a inline conversation, it's a form, it's any way that we're interacting directly with the website visitor. Typically, there's two ways a conversation is open. It can be opened through a widget or a toaster, little items on the corners or on the side of the screen. Somebody clicks it, it expands the pop-up or expands the form, anything else like that. The other way that we do it is through an observer. An observer can fire a conversation as an action. So in this case, we're using the is not present. And if it's not present, we're going to start that conversation. So where are we at? We've turned this on. Let's give this a hard refresh. What we're looking for is not present, is the submit button. The CSS selector points directly to that. Since this is present, it's not going to show anything. However, if we go to the home page, there is no submit button on this page. So that conversation, that pop-up is this, and it popped right up. So that's the way that works. Is not present. Let's disable that one and enable the next one. So this is a click. A click is about as direct and as simple, straightforward as we can think of as far as an action, right? As a trigger. So once they click this, and again, the CSS selector, if you look at it, is exactly the same as what we were looking at before. It's the submit button on a few different forms, but on the page that we're looking at. It's the submit button. If they click that, what are we going to do? We're going to update profile property of notes, and we're going to set it, we're going to add it to it, visitor data, value selector, not text, value selector of this. So I'll show you where that's at. Let's take a look at this. Let's go to contact. So when I submit, or when I click this button, in fact, I probably need to save that, don't I? When I click that, what is it going to do? It's going to update notes with the value that's in this text area. Pound is ID. So it's this one right here. Where is that at? If I look on the page, it's this message right there. So if I click this button, it's going to submit, or it's going to send whatever value I have here into my notes for my profile. So let's try that. Let's say, does this work? Submit. Now, this form isn't going to go through because the form itself has a bunch of required fields. So the form itself is never getting submitted. However, does this work? It pulled that from that list and it added it to what we had previously. So that's the way that one works. Just disable that. Oops. And enable the next one. Take a look at this. So when the mouse pointer hovers, we're using hover. So content is present, is not present, click hover is where we're at. And we're using the same CSS selector that we're pointing to that submit button. We're going to reload the page. And let me show you what this is. After. So there's a little bit of a delay there. It's in milliseconds. So 3,000 milliseconds would be 3 seconds. We want to save this. And when I hover over the submit button, it's going to reload the page. give it a refresh real quick. Okay, so hovering, 1, 2, 3, reload. Ha! It's like I'm a magician. There you go. So what we did there was we reloaded the page based off of a hover. That's a pretty rare implementation, but you can see in places that that would be used. Okay, so this one is when the value inside changes. This is a very common trigger that we use. Change means there's a page on the form and the value inside of it changes. Whenever that happens, and we're pointing to exactly where we're watching for that change, the CSS selector, we're going to click. And again, it looks like we've got the exact same CSS selector of the submit button. So whenever a value in this field changes, we're going to simulate a click on the submit button. So let's come back here. Let's navigate away. Well, actually, let's go back and make sure I saved it. So it's active, save it. Okay, let's come back to the home page real quick and then go back to that content page. So this is the field that we're actually watching for a change in. If I do a search, that was the input 1, 2. If I hover it, you can see it clearly. It's that first name field. So it's watching for a change in this value or in this field. And then when that happens, it's going to click this button for me. So this, we're going to do name Brian is my name. That. And there it goes. It clicked that button. You can tell because it's coming back saying, hey, you need to fill in the rest of these fields as well. Excellent. So let's go back to that one more time. Let's disable that and enable the next one. All right. So this one is pretty interesting. So we've gone through content is present, is not present, click, hover, change. And this is scroll. So this is saying, let me get rid of that real quick. What percentage? Let's say 80%. This is whenever somebody scrolls through 80% of the page, what are we going to do? We're going to redirect them. Just like we did before, we redirected to nba.com. However, this is a dynamic redirect. We changed this around. It's no longer static. What we're doing is a dynamic redirect. If we click this little gear icon, we can come into the setup for it. And the way it works is any profile property that we want to reference, we pull from down here. It's a list of all the profile properties. And then we add the query parameter, what we're calling. So in this case, what I'm calling is last refer URL, which is the last page that they're on before coming to the current page. This isn't for the session, this is for the actual page. So it's basically like a back button, more or less. We are using that and we're calling that LFR. And we're also going to be using their email value and calling that email. The way we set this up is we bracket anything that we need to reference these values. So I'm starting with bracket of LFR, which is going to be the last page that they're on, their last refer URL. So the last page before their current page. And then we're adding the question mark email equals as a parameter. And we're pulling the value of email, since it's in the brackets, from their email profile property. Done. So let's save this to make sure. Anytime that we go to 80% of the page, it's going to redirect us. Let's take a look at that. Let's go back to the home page. Notice we're coming from the contact page. Go back to the home page. Let's scroll it, scroll it, scroll it, scroll it, scroll it, scroll it, scroll it. Oh, we hit the 80% and got redirected to that contact page, which was our last referrer page. Then it added the and email equals, and then it pulled the value from my profile property. So that's a pretty flexible way to redirect kind of anywhere we need to do. We can pull any of the values from the profile property and place them into a URL for redirection alongside any type of text that we need to supplement that. I often use this type of redirect as a reload. If I want to reload the page, but I need to add URL parameters to it, we can do the exact same thing, but instead of using last refer URL, we would just say last page viewed. So this is the current page that they're on, and it would just reload that same page, but add the parameters of the email. So that works fine. Let's move on to the next one. Oh, one other thing is this is a delay. Quite often you'll see a little bit of a delay that you can add, and that's always in milliseconds. URL equals demo URL. Okay, so this one's a little bit different. Let's turn this on. Take a look at it. So here we're using URL, but not the actual URL. We could use contains, we could use not contains, any of that. But we want to go with demo equals URL because that's going to be where the parameters are at sometimes. So this is kind of simulating a parameter type of trigger. And what are we going to do? We're going to redirect, another dynamic redirect. This one looks more similar to the static. Let's take a look in here. So before there was options for substitute and append, we were doing the substitute. This is the append. And all this is doing is it's taking a regular base URL and then appending URL parameters based off of profile properties. So instead of us replacing them anywhere, we just tacks them on to the end in a standard format. So we don't need to have the question mark or the and sign or any of that stuff. That automatically all fills in. So let's take a look at this. This is going to pull my last name and send me to nba.com with my last name on it. Okay, so I've got it saved. Let's come to this page. Let's go home. Let's do @demo equals URL. Yep. And there you can see it redirected me to nba.com. It appended that LN, which I had given it for a query parameter, or the name for the parameter, and then fake. Let me show you something. So, my last name, my profile gets beat up quite a bit for testing. So that's where it's pulling that fake value from, is my last name, which isn't fake, but it is what it is. Excellent. So that means that one works. Let's move on to the next. Next up, we're going to talk about page load. This one is really, really simple. We've gotten through the majority of the kind of complex ones where we're pointing out or we're having to select the CSS selectors, anything like that. Most of the remaining ones are relatively simple. I just want to show a couple more examples of this. So actually, let's not do page number. Let's do current visit number. So on page load, we want to update the profile property of notes and set it for my visitor data, my visit number, which again, it's the session number, what session I'm currently on. Did I turn that on? Yep. Save, and it happens on page load. So this should be a relatively simple one to do. Let's do a hard refresh. I just did a page load. Okay, so if I come into my data and I search for notes, or if I just navigate to it, you can see I'm on the visit number 210 or session number 210. I have a lot of sessions. So if I come back to that observer again, you can see that it took from page load, it updated my profile property from notes and set my page view. Let's do one more down here, or pardon me, that wasn't it. This was it. On page load, it updated profile property of notes. It set it, didn't update it, added it to it, visitor data, visit number. Okay. So that gives us, I'm on visit number 210. Let's do this. Visit number equals 210. Yep. Save it. Oh, we got to enable that rule. Save it again. And then let's just give it a refresh. So I am on visit number 210 and it immediately redirected me. So it recognized what visit number I was on and use that as a trigger. Now I can continue to add rules and go through all the other settings, but to be honest, they're all pretty well self-explanatory from here. We've got all fields that are in values that we have in fields that we just need to reference. The rest of them, some of them get a little bit convoluted when you're talking about CSS selectors and having to point to things in websites. You don't have any of the others in the remaining actions. So let's walk through them real quick. We've got total page view number, screen resolution, width and height, browser width and height, ad block detected, device type, platform, operating system, browser, refer. All of those are pretty straightforward as far as being able to, like device type, content equals, we got all the options there. Right? All of those are relatively simple and relatively easy to walk through. So that would be the options for a behavior observer, all of the different triggers that are involved. And I think we walked through the majority of the different actions as well. And I think we hit them all except for the identify and the run symphony offline event. Yeah. Yep. So let's take a look at another one. This is a URL parameter observer. And I wanted to show you one that I use because I ran into an issue while I was recording this video, and this is how I solved it. So this is one of them that we use to set profiles to test accounts. And basically what it's saying is anytime that there's it's kind of hard to see it in there, but anytime there's a URL parameter and we type that in of test account and it contains yes, we update the profile property of test account and we update it with a custom value of yes. So what that means is anytime somebody comes to a page like daymate.com, test account equals yes, it's going to capture that URL parameter. If it ever loads, it would capture that URL parameter and update the profile property of test account to yes. I've got a segment of test accounts in here as well. This is my profile. That all of these have a value of yes or not empty under the test account profile property. So it all kind of works together and groups the profiles together by that. The reason why I wanted to show this one, and it's hard for me to illustrate it, is because I have some issues showing IP within my company network to show it. So I was using my cell phone and I realized that my cell phone profile was separate. So I had to make my cell phone profile a test account as well. And that's what I'm doing right now is I'm navigating to that URL on my cell phone. I apologize, this isn't very demo worthy, but you'll see why in just a moment. So this is my cell phone. or my mobile profile. All right. So again, I apologize for playing on my phone while I'm chit-chatting with you, but I navigated to that URL, to pretty much the same URL I typed up there. And then it set me into test accounts. If you notice previously, this profile was not part of that. Now it is. And the reason why is, again, going back to this observer, it had a URL parameter of test account when I navigated there on my phone, and it contained yes. So the trigger was met, and the action was going to be to update the profile property of test account to a value of yes. And then within the segment, any profile with test account equals yes or test account is not empty gets added to that segment. So that's how this segment, well, if I refresh, this segment now includes my profile there and the my mobile profile. Most recently added. Okay. So the reason why I wanted to do that was because I had trouble showing the IP stuff within my go through profiles real quick. Okay. I had some issues getting the IP to work within my company network, and you will have issues like that from time to time. However, what I've got here is my IP from my phone. So this is an IP observer. IP equals, I've got other options, greater than, less than, not between, you can set the range, but I know exactly which IP I'm going to be targeting. And what am I going to do? I'm going to be updating the profile property of notes and set it to a custom value of that's me. Okay. So all I need to do is navigate or turn this rule on and save it. Then when I navigate to any of the pages on my phone, just went to staymates.com, I should be able to come into here, do a refresh here. Whoops. Data. Need to refresh my entire browser. Navigate to a page. Careers. Still refresh here. Test accounts. Check my IP and make sure I'm there is a possibility that my IP had changed in between. And it did. Okay. So my IP had to be updated. Now, if I go back and I go to a different page. Okay. Now, if I go back to this profile and do a refresh, there we go. Excellent. So walking through this, the reason why this didn't work the first time was because I was navigating to it with, or I had a different IP address here. So as soon as I updated that to my current IP address on my phone, I navigated to the page, and what happened was it set the notes to this profile to that's me. Excellent. Let's disable that. Now this one's a little bit different as well, because this is a geolocation. So the first rule, oops, I got my IP address changed. So you can copy that. Okay, so let's save this. And this is geolocation, and it does have some IP possibilities as a range as well. I wanted to use it on my phone one more time. And when the IP equals what it does from my phone, we're going to update a profile property from the profile property of notes. We're going to add the profile property of last page viewed. So let's try that. Let's go to a different page here. Actually, make sure I save this. Let's go to the contact page again on this one. Okay, so we went to art culture instead. Let's see what happened with our notes. So I went to a couple different pages, actually. I went to our work and then our culture, and it captured both of those. Why did it capture those? Because this rule right here, IP equals the 172.58.10.207. That's my mobile device. I just navigated to a couple pages, so it updates the profile property of notes, which is what we're looking at here, with a custom, or pardon me, with the profile property of last page viewed. So that's the way that one works. Okay, so I'm done with IP for a little bit. So I'm back to my device. Let's turn this one on. When city contains Perrysburg, set the notes to Perrysburg. Okay, I'm going to save this. And I'm going to go to staymates.com. Oh, what happened here? Did I leave one of my rules that was redirecting me off or on? Not that one. That one. No, I want to keep that on. These need to be disabled. This needs to be deleted. Yeah. So again, we're on this rule. When the city contains Perrysburg, we're going to update the notes and set it to Perrysburg. So let's try it again. Back on my desktop profile. And there it is. Perrysburg comes through. Why? Because if I look at my data and I go city, I've got Perrysburg there. So back to that rule. When the city contains Perrysburg, it's going to update the profile property of notes, adding to it the custom value of Perrysburg. Excellent. Woo. Okay. That works fine. Let's disable that and move on. We've only got a couple more left here. For the exit intent, I'll show you this one real quick. So in the exit intent, we are saying it starts with this page. This is only running off of this page. Again, you have to be in test counts, but there is a delay of 1 second or 1,000 milliseconds if the user gets from 5% to the top. What are we going to do? We're going to start the conversation, stop sign for demo with 0 delay. Enabled, we are. Okay, so let's go to that page. I copied it, so I'm just going to paste it in. And there we go. What was this supposed to do? Probably something. There it is. Pardon me. It was the exit intent. So let me reload that page to show you what happened there. Okay, so this has got the exit intent, which means anytime somebody's looking at this page, right, they're navigating around, if they get tired of this page, the way they would leave it typically would be to go to the URL, the back button, or to their bookmarks. So anything coming up here to the top. So I'm coming 1 second, and there it is. That's opening up that conversation. So the observer is, after 1 second, from 5% to the top, we're going to start that conversation. And it worked as we expected. Okay. So really that covers the majority of our triggers for observers and the majority of, or all of our actions, right? I do want to talk a little bit later about identify and run Symphony events. Those will have their own separate videos. But essentially what those are calling the API for visual visitor to identify to a household level that profile to run their script or their API on it. And then the run Symphony offline event, this is how we would trigger an event in Symphony or Gulara. It's or pardon me, Symphony. Trigger an offline event on there that would go into their automation that could do any number of things. We could send an email, we could do a phone call or a text message. There's a lot of automated events that we can set up within Symphony. But I'll show you those in a separate video. So we're not going to worry about that side too much. There are a couple of other things within observers that I did not talk about here. If you look in the source constraints form, if we wanted them to only run off of a particular source, in these cases, I was setting it as meetings today or staymates. I could have just set the source rather than the page view. So it's another way to slice it that, but we are able to decide which source constraints these will run. We can also do division constraints. What division constraints are kind of an internal limit on your users. So this one has no constraints, which means any user that comes into SureCatch could edit this, right? If I were to set it as a division constraint A, what that means is in order for me or any other user in SureCatch to come in and edit this, they would have to be assigned into division A within their user settings, under administration. I don't want to have any of that. So that is an option for that. We can duplicate and we can delete these. I think that kind of covers the core functionality of observers. I believe it does. We'll get into a little bit more in depth in the, like I said, the API calls. We may be creating a little bit more guidance or reference items for CSS selectors. However, most of that you can find online. It's relatively simple to get acclimated to CSS selectors if you're not before. Other than that, I believe this culminates our observer chat. Thank you for following along. I hope you have a great day. Thank you.